Give me the thumbs up when you're ready. I see the webinar is being live streamed. And so I will begin.
No, it says setting up your webinar. Okay, now, and I'm looking to see if it's showing up. Yeah, okay.
All right. Well, good evening to everyone. At this point, I believe the session has begun and everyone should be seeing my face or hearing my voice. And I want to welcome you. I am Chaplain and Reverend Frank Harris. Welcome to our Wellness on Wednesday event. We welcome you on behalf of our pastor, Reverend Dr. Isaac J. Holt Jr. This was his vision, I believe about 5 years ago, that we would have a format where we could bring the community resources and partner with the church community, the faith community, to address some practical needs, some areas of need that we see and sense in our community and our places of worship. But there are so many experts out there. And so it's wonderful when we can bring those experts, those voices within this very special space to just dialogue. This is really just a conversation. We've invited experts, we've invited friends, we've invited, I'm sure, familiar faces that many of us know, just to share from their perspective on this particular area. So we welcome them and we welcome you. There will be an opportunity for you to share through an anonymous chat function. I will invite you should be able to look down perhaps at the bottom of your screen, and there's a Q&A function. You can submit your question anonymously at any point during this panel discussion. And at the end of our panel discussion, we will look at those Q&A questions, and our panelists will have the opportunity to address those questions. So we thank you and we welcome you, not only on behalf of our pastor, Reverend Dr. Isaac J. Holt Jr., but also the chairperson for our Wellness on Wednesday ministry, and the person of Sister Cleo Brown, and our other members of that particular ministry as well. So it's an honor to be with you. Tonight's discussion is on post-traumatic triumphs, finding resiliency after life's tragedies and disappointments. And from my particular perspective as a chaplain and as a minister, I think back to the story that is depicted in the Gospel of Luke. In Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 36, there's an episode where there are two disciples who have just witnessed the crucifixion, and it does not make sense to them. It was a crisis moment in their faith. It was a traumatic experience where all of a sudden life didn't make sense. And I am by no means a medical expert or a therapeutic expert. We have the experts on the panel tonight. But from my perspective as a minister, I think about trauma in the sense that there's something in my story that doesn't make sense. There's a gap in my story. I started at point A, I'm at point C, and point B doesn't make sense. In that story in the Gospel of Luke, there was a companion who came alongside these two disciples and inserted a perspective in their journey that helped them make sense of their story. And so we have experts who represent a lot of resources in our community who can come alongside us for tonight and offer resources, offer their perspective that hopefully it won't obviously fix a lot of situations, but it can remind us that we are not by ourselves and there are resources available, and certainly listening ears tonight. So we welcome our panelists. I will have the opportunity to welcome each one right before they present, and then we will again, toward the end of our discussion tonight, invite the questions that you submit in the Q&A section of the platform tonight. We'll address those as well. So again, thank you so much for being with us. And with all that said, we invite you to join in a moment of quiet reflection and/or prayer as we journey together tonight. Let us begin as I share these words. We are grateful tonight, God, our creator, God, our sustainer, for this opportunity to hear from those who work in the field of trauma or who can share from their experience of grief. And on this journey tonight, help us to be reminded that we are not by ourselves. Thank you for your comfort. Thank you for your companionship. Thank you for your guidance. And help our hearts and minds to be sensitive as we journey together into some deep and delicate areas. But thank you that there is still hope. Thank you that there is still restoration available. And thank you for these voices and these experiences that we will hear tonight. Thank you for this sacred space as we meet together. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. Well, we again welcome each of you. And it is my honor to begin this time by welcoming and introducing our first panelist for this evening, which is the Honorable Melinda Witherspoon Terry. Mrs. Witherspoon Terry is from Latson, South Carolina, that great metropolis just up the road, and is the married mother of 3 daughters. She currently serves on the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice Parole Board and works in the community with the National Alliance of Mental Illness as the Charleston area affiliate. Mrs. Witherspoon Terry is a passionate advocate, especially in the Black and Brown communities, for family members and those living with mental illness. So Mrs. Witherspoon Terry, we welcome you, and I can talk about Latson because I'm your neighbor in Latson as well. But it's great that we are neighbors tonight and fellow laborers. And I just begin, Mrs. Terry, by not only welcoming you, but asking the question, would you just share with us what led you to this work regarding mental illness? What got you into this work?
Well, thank you, Reverend Harris, and it's nice to know that we are neighbors. Many of you may not know about NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, but NAMI was actually started by mothers. There were some mothers that were having some difficulties with their children, and they truly sat around the table and said, okay, what are we going to do? And now NAMI is in every state in the country and in some other parts of the country as well. So I say that to say that's how I started with NAMI. I had a daughter that was struggling, and I truly didn't know what to do. And I stumbled onto NAMI. And once I finished the work for myself, just like any good organization, they put me to work. And I've been here ever since. And I know the challenges and the difficulties that I went through as a mother with a child struggling. And this was some years ago. But if nothing else, I will, not on my watch, will any mother, any father ever have to go through what I went through. And so that's why I'm here. That's why I do it. It keeps me going, and it's why I'm here.
That is so wonderful. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for sharing with us what led you into that work. And I'm wondering, as you participate with NAMI, what impacts do you see in our communities related to mental illness and or trauma?
You said what impacts, but
what impacts do you see in the community related to mental illness and or trauma?
Well, I think as Charlestonians, we've all seen the increase in arrests. We've seen the increase in violent deaths. We've seen the increase in suicides. Charleston County is one of the top 10 counties in the state for rates of suicide, the top 10. We're seeing an increase in overdoses. So, and also when we've all experienced this, the pandemic has left so many people concerned and afraid, and the mental health calls are tripling. We now, and I want to put this out there, there is now a 988 number that went into effect last July. And this 988 number is the 911 of mental illness. And this all came about because the resources are stretched. So we are trying to provide and do as much as we can for those people that are in need. So we all have seen what the role mental health has had on our communities. The communities are struggling, and it takes people like us to help and try to get the people that we know and the people that we are close to, get them the help that they need.
Thank you. Thank you. And speaking of help, I'm wondering what resources are offered through NAMI.
Well, with NAMI, we have support groups. We have support groups. We're peer-to-peer support groups. So if you are a person suffering with a mental illness, you can come and talk to a person of your peers. We have support groups for family members that are taking care of individuals with mental illness. But also we have classes that we teach you. We teach you the language. We teach you what to say to doctors. We teach you what to expect. We teach you what to do in a crisis. But more than that, I like to say, you got me. Because if you have something going on in your life, if you have something you have to deal with and you cannot, you call me. I'm there. I'm holding your hand. And sometimes I will even talk to you if you cannot, because your voice matters. Whatever it is you're going through matters. And I'm going to catch myself because I feel this. No one is alone. And if it's the one thing I do, you don't have to be alone. So that's.
Wow. Wow. That is so wonderful. Can you talk to us or just share with us if someone is interested in reaching out to you or to your organization, how can they reach you or reach your
Absolutely.
organization?
NAMI Charleston area, we have a website. I will put it in the chat box. You can reach out to the email address. You can email us and that email comes directly to me. So if you email, you'll be emailing me and I'll be the one that's replying. So I will put our email information in there, and I will also put my contact information in there, because sometimes I respect, and it took me a long time to get here. It took me a very long time to be able to talk publicly about my daughter. So I realized that some people are private. You may not want everyone in NAMI to know what you're going through, and I can respect that. So I will include my personal information. So because that's what I do. I'm just not here on this Zoom call. I'm here. If you need somebody to talk to, you call me. That's what we do. That's what I do. So I will include that contact information in the chat so people can reach out.
Well, thank you so much. And I already see, honestly, a question that is in the chat that's referencing the fact that sometimes we as family members or loved ones see that there is a need. And how can we, what advice would you offer to someone who sees a family member who may need those services, but that person is reluctant to seek those out? What would you say?
Well, that's typically the case. I mean, very few people wake up and say, okay, you know what, today I need to go have an appointment with a therapist or a psychiatrist. But what you can do is have that honest conversation with yourself first and recognize the signs that you're seeing. And you have to be in a position where you can sit down and talk to that person. And of course, I'm talking as if that person is an adult, not that it makes it any easier if it's a child, but if this person is an adult, but also if this person is in a space where they can hear it, because if they're not thinking clearly or they're not able to hear you, it's not going to be real effective. So what you can do is reach out to us, call NAMI. We can help you try to recognize the signs that you're seeing and guide you into the direction where you may need to get some help for that person, for that family member.
Well, again, we thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you for being here tonight. And we will have, I'm sure, some other questions for you as we hear from our attendees. So thank you, Mrs. Witherspoon Terry, for sharing. And I would also invite and welcome our second panelist for this evening in the person of Ms. Meg Wallace. Ms. Wallace is a licensed independent social worker for the state of South Carolina and a board-approved supervisor. She is a clinical instructor with the Department of Psychiatry, Behavioral Sciences at the Medical University of South Carolina. Ms. Wallace is the Associate Director of Clinical Operations for the National Crime Victims Research and Treatment Center, or NCVC. And the Associate Director for the Community Outreach Program Esperanza, or COPE. Ms. Wallace also serves as the Director for the Master of Social Work Field Education at the NCVC. Ms. Wallace has a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from the College of Charleston and a Master's in Social Work from the College of Social Work at the University of South Carolina. She completed her generalist practice internship at the NCVC and her advanced practice internship at the D. Norton Child Advocacy Center. And for the last 11 years, Ms. Wallace has served as the coordinator for a federally funded Victims of Crime Act, or VOCA, service grant aimed to improve resources for survivors of homicide and victims of crime with barriers to traditional office-based treatment. In addition, Ms. Wallace provides direct service and supervision of evidence-based treatments, including trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, alternatives for families, cognitive behavioral therapy, and risk reduction through family therapy. Ms. Wallace has expertise in traumatic loss, evidence-based trauma treatment, telehealth service delivery, and community-based mental health approaches. So Ms. Wallace, Meg, we welcome you and thank you for being with us tonight. And so not only do you serve in the community, but you teach others how to use their gifts and their education and prepare them for service as well. So we are grateful for your time with us tonight. And so,
thank you so much for having me. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you tonight. So I appreciate that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so I just begin by asking the question, you touch so many areas related to trauma work. So can you describe what is unique about trauma as it relates to grief and how what approaches you and your team take to care for those who experience trauma?
Absolutely. So grief is a universal experience, right? Most people across different times in your life, you experience some sort of important or significant loss. So all of us have some understanding of what grief and loss looks like in some fashion. But when we think about ways that traumatic losses occur, so these are really unexpected losses, often violent, there's kind of an added layer to that experience. And so we're dealing with the idea of grief and loss of that experience, but also the impact of the trauma. Many folks either witness that type of loss or they might hear details. There's also system involvement, so things like court or having to be involved with medical personnel around it that just adds a layer of complexity. And then you think about it from an idea of with things like homicide, there's this act of volition. So there was some intention of harm towards someone that resulted in a death. And so all of that just adds to the complexity of it. One of the things that I've been working with survivors of homicide for about 15 years now, and our survivors are fantastic. We have a support group that we run through our office. And one of the things that our survivors always say that our group and our outreach groups are the family that they never wanted to join, but the family that they found along this journey, and kind of a family of unfortunate understanding, because it's just a different type of loss experience, and really making sure that we're tending to the needs of someone as a victim of a crime, as well as, you know, the experience of maintaining a connection to someone who played a significant part in their life. Oh, Reverend Harris, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I only do that about 10 times a day. I forget to unmute myself.
I think we all do it. Even 3 years later, we all do it.
Well, I was just saying such important work. And I would just follow up with that question, So your work with the National Crime Victims Research and Treatment Center, what are some of the things you have done locally and nationally through that effort? What are some of the things you have seen?
Absolutely. So our center is a national center, in that we do research and teaching and training nationally and even internationally, really working to create more providers who can do this work in the communities that they live in and serve. So that's kind of where we have our national focus. But locally here in Charleston and in the surrounding areas, we have a clinic here. So we provide treatment for both adults and children who've experienced some sort of trauma or violent victimization. Our name's a little bit of a misnomer because you don't have to have experienced a criminal victimization. We also work with folks who've experienced natural disasters or accidents that have been really scary. And we provide individual and family counseling through our program. We also take an outreach approach to our services. So we have a clinic downtown, but we have a number of clinicians who go out into the community to provide these services, really trying to address a lot of the systemic barriers that we know people face. You know, Charleston, for example, doesn't always have the greatest public transportation system. And so we know that that can be a reason why someone may not reach out for help. So instead, our clinicians go out into houses of faith. So working with local churches. I particularly work a lot with kids and supervise a lot of kid cases. And so we do work with local area schools. We have a contract with Charleston County School District right now where we go into schools. We also have worked with community centers, law enforcement, child advocacy centers, really anywhere that we can find to meet with someone, we'll do it. I've done sessions from my car in a McDonald's parking lot if that's what we have to do. To make sure that we're bringing services to people who need it the most. And then we also offer, in our Survivors of Homicide program, we actually have a support group that runs weekly that is free of charge. There's no charge service. You don't have to have insurance to attend, that we lead. It's currently on Zoom. And we do a couple of outreach events throughout the year. This weekend, actually, we have our annual Survivors Picnic for anyone who's been impacted by homicide. And it's more about fellowship and coming together with that people that understand. But we do a lot of work around our community to make sure that things like insurance, things like being able to pay for services, transportation are not going to be the reason someone doesn't get seen. So if we can figure out a way to address those things, we're going to do it. And that's really the work that we try to do locally.
Well, Meg, that was one of the most impressive things amongst a lot of things that you and your team provide. Just a number of resources that I had no idea that were available. You've touched on some of those, but are there any other specific resources you'd like to share with our team tonight? Absolutely.
For anyone, either if you know them or you yourself have been a victim of a crime in South Carolina or other states, one of the things that not everyone knows exists is every state in the United States has what's called a Department of Crime Victims compensation. It has different names, but it exists. It's federal and state money that is available to people who have been a victim of a crime to help cover cost of services for things like mental health services, physical appointments related to injuries sustained during that experience. For violent loss, sometimes they can help cover funeral or burial expenses. There's an application process, but law enforcement victim advocates should be helping to connect people to that, but that exists in South Carolina. So if you've been a victim of a crime, and you have questions, you can call our office. We're happy to connect folks. And then for other types of experiences, so for example, for families who've been impacted by suicide, in Charleston community, we have a survivors of suicide support group as well. I'm also on the board for our community walk for suicide prevention. And so there's also like local nonprofits and resources related to some of those other types of loss experiences. And what I often find most of the time, it's great for professionals like myself and my community that I work in to exist. But finding a community of people who understand your experiences is really, really important along this journey. And so through groups like NAMI or through groups like the suicide prevention or the support groups that we offer, it's not just about connecting to professionals, but connecting to people who are also walking that journey and understand. And so that's my biggest thing, is really trying to find a place to connect with your community.
Meg, thank you so much. Is there a contact number or a website that folks can get a hold to you and your team?
Yes. So what I will do, I don't know if I can share it I think I can share it to the whole chat. I do have a guidebook that's available. I'll try to put it in the chat for our Survivors of Homicide Support Group program. If folks have questions about services, particularly for mental health services related to victimization, they can call our office at 843-792-8209 and ask to speak to one of our case managers. We have about 7 on staff who are fantastic. And even if we don't have the services that folks are looking for, we have really strong community contacts and community partners. So we're able to usually connect folks to people in the community that might be able to help.
Well, Meg, that is so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And I believe you're going to give me some hard copy resources that I can make available through the Royal Foundation at Royal Missionary Baptist Church for anyone who would be interested in getting those. So thank you for providing that and literally putting those in my hands so we can get it out to the community. Thank you. More to come. I'm sure there will be other questions that we have for you at a later point in our discussion tonight. But thank you at this point, Meg, for what you have shared with us. Well, we've continued the discussion tonight, and we're so grateful again to welcome Mr. Keith Smalls. I literally see him in the hallway of our MUSC campus, I would say almost on a weekly basis, if not every other day. And I see even now, as I continue this introduction for Brother Keith, that Meg is putting some information in our chat function that if you have the capability at your home computer or wherever you're viewing this, you can be able to download. But we will certainly make sure that we have the hard copy information available to you as well. But thank you, Mr. Keith Smalls, again, for being with us, as well as your colleague, Krista, who is the coordinator, both of them, Keith and Krista, work with the MUSC Turning the Tide Violence Intervention Program. Keith is a client advocate for that work and service. And again, Krista is the coordinator. So we are grateful to both of them for being with us tonight. And so I would just invite them. I get to look over their shoulders every now and then and collaborate, but just really to see some of the great work. And many of us maybe have already heard about their efforts in many places, not only within the hospital walls, but in the community as well. So Keith, we invite you just to share from your perspective about the Turning the Tide program and the work you are doing at MUSC as well as in the community.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Myself as client advocate and our program director, Krista Green. I think, the Turning the Tide program is a new program to the city of Charleston. It's hospital violence intervention. What can I say about it? But just amazing, amazing opportunity, amazing work. privileged to work with an amazing team around such an important, a field of work. Never would I have kind of envisioned that this work would exist, that it would be me frontline advocating, working in a hospital space, integrating community around such a need, right? The program in itself, we work with kids between the ages of 12 to 30 who have been victims of gun violence. And me as a client advocate and my other counterparts, Kat Yeeman and Donna Michi Singleton, we work hand in hand with those who are victims of gun violence in the hospital setting, coming through the front door, working again as an integral part, as you see, with chaplaincy, hospital staff, hospital security, social workers, doing what we call providing the continuum of care around wraparound services internally in the hospital, but equally as important, maybe even more important, externally with stakeholders from the community. Uh, you know, that's almost like just giving you a synopsis overview and abbreviated version of the space that we work in. Very intense, very impactful. I think just a very it is a heavy load and a heavy space. Seeing families coming in and recognizing that a great deal of the number of families that we deal with are more concerned with social economical issues than gun wounds. And that's where we come in at, trying to bridge the gap of the need uh, and getting them the resources, whether it's national crime victims internally or trauma resilience program, again, internally, but also externally. Simple things like driver's license and IDs, or helping them get in school, or if it's a DJJ situation, or even just retaliation messaging, motivational interviewing. Is the spectrum is really long of the things that we are able to kind of fill a need for with this individual, trying to get them back on the right track, right, recognizing what caused them to be in this situation. What was it, directly, indirectly, environmental? um you know uh, a great deal of assessment work is done in this, assessing this individual, assessing the situation, working with the advocacy program, whether in law enforcement or just advocating for them and their needs. It just, to me, is just a moving, great situation to be in for myself. Losing a son to gun violence, I'll say, from my past experience, being a father or survivor of gun violence, being able to fill a gap in the need for these individuals who are survivors of gun violence. Um, just, so much I can say, but just an honor and a privilege to be in this space and be able to do the work. So, you know, I leave the rest for our director, Krista Green, to kind of share and add. But again, just honored again to be here. Thank you, Pastor Frank, for putting us on and allowing us the opportunity to share and shine light more so on the program, but also on the wellness that everyone here on this panel brings.
Well, Keith, again, thank you. We opened up our session just talking about the fact how important it is. And I think even one of our other panelists talked about the fact when someone can come alongside us who can relate, and that person can relate to the person who's coming to assist, that means so much. So we feel your passion and we thank you for the work you're doing, literally coming to the side of those who are going through this very traumatic experience. It means so much. And so I can certainly testify, if you will, of the great work that you and your team are doing. And we know that every great team needs a great leader. And so we invite Krista, as the director of that effort, to come and share from her perspective, if she would like to join us at this moment, just to offer any other additional insight, perhaps. So we just welcome you, Krista, into this space, if you'd like to share.
Yeah, thank you so much. Happy to be here and be part of this important conversation. I think Keith, as always, does an excellent job of really kind of painting the picture. So I thought what I might do is kind of take a step back and kind of talk a little bit more about how the program is designed. Because I think Keith, obviously with his frontline experience, paints a picture of perhaps, as a patient comes in, what does that look like, right? When Keith gets there, what does that look like? But I think if you kind of like rewind the tape a bit further and think about what happens without Keith there, we've got youth often, right? Young adults that come in with a violent injury, they're shot. Those are often incredibly serious, life-threatening injuries, and often injuries that they don't survive. It's incredibly traumatic. The patient is terrified. They either sometimes do know who shot them or don't know who shot them. They are in incredible amounts of pain. They are often rushed there without their parents. Their parents don't even know. And it's just a very chaotic situation. And so before the hospital violence intervention program existed, yes, hospitals have social workers and case managers, but they are so overworked. We often have one social worker covering entire services, and it's just unsustainable where that social worker is doing their best to provide individualized time, attention, and care, but is being pulled in so many directions. And with such a complex, high needs kind of situation, like a young gunshot victim, we need someone that can stand by the bedside or sit in the OR waiting room for hours, holding mom's hand while we find out if her son is going to make it. And as Keith said, it is so vitally important that the folks doing that work are folks that look like our patients, are folks that live in our patients' communities, are folks that understand firsthand the impact of gun violence, not because other people can't relate or can't sympathize, but because so much of this work is founded on trust. And there are decades, centuries of mistrust between communities of color and the healthcare system, communities of color and law enforcement. And part of what this work does, this long-term work, Keith talked about, most of the work we do is out in the community. That is all built on a foundation of what happens in the hospital. And so what Keith and Kat and Donnie do is they are often waiting in the trauma bay before that patient even gets wheeled in. So they are one of the first people that this patient sees when they get to the hospital. It doesn't matter if it's 3 a.m. or 3 p.m., if it's Monday morning or Saturday night, they're there. And that's when it starts. But like a lot of programs in hospitals, when that patient discharges, that program kind of just sets them off and says, good luck, right? Mm-hmm. And so what hospital violence intervention programs do and says, no, I'm coming with you. I'm going to literally hold your hand through this whole process, because as some of us can imagine, and as some of us know firsthand, getting shot and surviving is just the first part, right? Now we need to recover, and we need to address some of those risk factors for why we got shot. And it may have been random, but there are a lot of variables, like where we live. Do we work? Do we go to school? Are we struggling to put food on the table? Do we have healthcare insurance? Do we have reliable transportation, right? If the answer is no to any of those questions, that raises our risk. And so if we're just patching patients up and sending them back into the same environment where they were shot in the first place, we really shouldn't be surprised when oftentimes upwards of 20 to 40% of patients that are shot within 5 years get shot again. And so what our program does, what our frontline intervention workers do, is they kind of interrupt that cycle and they address the risk factors. And so we're greatly reducing the likelihood that that person will be re-victimized. And we're providing, like Keith said, those wraparound services. We're not just patching up the bullet hole, right? We are addressing the psychosocial, economical, factors that led to this, but can also kind of solve those risk factors, right? Or address them significantly in a way that reduces their risk for this happening again. Because what we know is that once someone is shot, they're even more likely to be shot again. They're also more likely to perpetrate violence. And so we often talk about the cycle of violence. And particularly with community violence, it's incredibly cyclical. There's a lot of retaliation, right? Some people, retaliate immediately. Some people play the long game. And so there's cyclical retaliatory violence that occurs over literal generations. And so if we can interrupt that, right, by meeting them at one of the most critical moments, that one of the most teachable moments, right, when their life has literally just flashed before their eyes, we have an opportunity to intervene, particularly with our youth and our young adults who still have their whole lives ahead of them and are oftentimes just victims of circumstances, right, that they had no choice over. And so I'll kind of stop there because I could literally talk about this all day. But I think, what Keith and I could talk about too is that we're really focusing on and letting the patient and their family drive the intervention. I might say, hey, buddy, carrying a firearm is super dangerous. And he might say, that's nice. I'm terrified for my life. I need it for protection. I'm not worried about carrying a gun. I'm worried about putting food on the table for my family. Well, then we're going to modify our intervention to meet his most urgent needs, right? And then hopefully over time, through building rapport and reducing other risk factors, we can convince him that perhaps carrying a firearm is too risky, right? And is not the best idea for him or his family, right? So again, I'll stop there. Feel free to ask another question, but I could keep going.
Well, I will just make the observation at this point. I think about something I heard said that nothing changes until people care. And so we so appreciate your voices in your work, Keith and Krista and your team. Thank you for putting those values into action, as we say around here at MUSC. And my friend Keith was literally recognized by that. We have a name for an award given here at our institution, Values in Action. And Keith and his colleague were recipients of that just recently. So it just says that the work is making a difference. And we so appreciate what you are doing. And again, for being here tonight. And like I will continue to say, I'm sure there will be other questions that come in through our chat that we will be able to offer you and our other panelists as we go further. But thank you for sharing and helping us to have a little glimpse of the work that you all are doing. Thank you so much. Well, we continue our discussion. And I'm grateful again this evening to have someone from the royal family who will be sharing with us tonight. And it's our own, I will say, sister, Angela President. Angela is from Charleston, South Carolina, and the proud mother of three. And she writes in her own words that after the loss of her youngest son, Amari T. President, she has repurposed her grief and dedicated her life to encouraging and motivating others. She has had her share of highs and lows, but through it all, she has had God on her side. Angela's tenacity and drive are nothing short of an inspiration. She's overcome obstacle after obstacle, and God landed her on her feet every time. No matter what life throws her way, she remains undefeated. Angela will forever speak her mind and refuse to play the victim. She is a thriver and victorious. Through her pains, she has learned countless lessons. So, Angela, we first thank you for being with us tonight. And
thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for sharing insights from your personal journey. And I just invite you to share in your own way what some of those lessons have been that you would just like to share with us.
Some of the lessons that I have.
Yeah, just from your own perspective. You're already sharing your smile, which is an encouragement. But just anything you would have to offer.
I'm so grateful for this smile. First of all, like I said, I want to say thank you guys for having me on this panel. I appreciate it. yes, I am the mother of Amari President. He passed away. It'll be 3 years this August. Football player, came home from football practice, collapsed at the age of 16. It was very devastating and very, very, very traumatic. But one thing I learned while I was dealing with my grief with Amari is that I had been dealing with trauma and grief and loss from a very early age and didn't even know it. Being molested and raped at a young age, not knowing who I was, not knowing what direction to go into, life spiraling down, becoming a wife, becoming a mother, then losing a son. I learned that I have to fight. I have to fight for everything that I want. I have to fight. Yes, it was very, very, very traumatic. Very, very, very traumatic. Being molested and being raped and losing Amari. But I learned to trust God. I learned to pray. I learned to never give up. And most importantly, I've learned that my story is just not for me. I didn't go through everything that I went through just for me. When I went into that very dark place, when I lost Amari, God came to me. He told me to share your story. And that's how I ended up birthing the book that I have, Pain, Purpose, and God's Plan. God was revealing to me all of the trauma and pain that I was going through. And he was like, you know what? At this point, daughter, you're still here. You're still fighting. We're going to push forward. We're going to get this story out. And you're going to know your purpose and know your worth. So today here, I can say that I know my purpose and I know my worth. Yes, losing my son, once again, very painful. But I can say that I understand now. I know what my purpose is. And I can say that my son's life saved my life. Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard. As much as I tell the story over and over again, it's hard. It's absolutely hard. But I fight. Because I know that I'm not the only grieving mother. And I know I'm not going to be the last grieving mother. But if I just fight and I just keep pushing forward and I keep sharing my story and I keep smiling and I keep trusting God and letting everyone know how far God has brought me, I can give somebody hope, help them with their faith, and help them get closer to God. Because if you see it in me, he can do it for you.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I will go ahead and pass along something someone says in the chat. They just share, wow, Ms. President, what an awesome testimony. So just as you shared your purpose in sharing your story.
Yes.
I also think about what is shared in a very sacred passage of scripture, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4, which is one of my go-tos. But it talks about how God comforts us when we go through something so that we can pass on that comfort to others. So the comfort we receive is not only for us, it's just like you were just sharing.
Yeah.
That the comfort is made available so that we can pass it on. And that's why we're here tonight, sharing these stories so that others can fill in the gaps in their story.
Yeah. Because I wanted to give up. I wanted to give up. I no longer wanted to be here. Once, like I said, God, it was like he was playing a VHS tape back. I'm sitting here grieving my son, but then everything comes back. And I guess that has something to do with a little bit of mental health as well, because I buried all those traumatic things that I've been through as a child. I buried the bad relationships. I buried all of that. But once the grief hit and it was so hard and it was so heavy, everything had to come out. All of it just started playing right in front of me. And God was like, daughter, it's time for you to heal. You're still here. Your son has opened the door for you. He has a name and you have a name too. So now that the door is open, I want you to pour it all out so I can make you brand new. I want you to pour it all out so I can heal you. And I want you to go and I want you to stand in front of people and tell your story. Let that little girl know that whatever happened to you, it wasn't supposed to happen to you. Recognize the signs so that it doesn't happen to a generation after you. To that mother that lost her son, I know you want to give up. Ask God to give you understanding and guidance on why your child isn't here and why you had to close the casket on your child. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that expression, companion with your words, said so much. And I think about your name. You mentioned your name. You have a name, Angela. I think about angel. An angel is a messenger from God, messenger from heaven. And thank you for sharing your message tonight and in other ways through your book and just through your words that you share in so many ways. So
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely.
Yes, the book is called Pain, Purpose, and God's Plan. It is available at my website, which is www.angelapresident.com. That's where you can get the autographed copy, but I am also on Amazon as well. Pain, Purpose, and God's Plan, Life Lessons on Losing. A grieving mother sharing her story to everyone, giving everyone hope that storms don't last forever.
Well, while we're on this subject, I have just seen a question that I will just go ahead and go to in the chat, and then we will turn it. There it is. All right, you see it. But someone asked in the chat function, what do you mean when you say that your son Amari saved your life?
When I say what I mean by that, when I say Amari's life saved my life, is my life was on a spiral to hell. I self-sabotaged myself. Instead of dealing with my pains and my traumas as I was going through them, like I stated before, I was burying them and putting them into the back of my mind and self-medicating, if we're going to keep it real and we're going to be honest. Wherever the drugs was, I was there. Wherever the alcohol was, I was there. Bouncing in and out of relationships, burying things instead of healing from them. So once Amari passed away, because his life was phenomenal. If you read about Amari, you know, in the 16 years that he was here, he came here, he did what he needed to do. So with the passing of him is when my relationship grew closer with God. And he saved my life.
This preacher will say that will preach. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to touch bases again, I'm sure, as we hear from others in the Q&A function. I will just remind folks that attendees that you can share any question anonymously in the Q&A function. We're keeping an eye on the Q&A function. You won't be able to unmute, but you will be able to share through the Q&A function. So I just offer that as a reminder to any attendee tonight or any one of our panelists. Further, Timothy, I say welcome back. And I think this is a good place to bring you into the conversation. I say welcome back because you were with the Royal community. I think it was back in February when we had a grief workshop at the Royal Missionary Baptist Church in North Charleston. It was sponsored and spearheaded by our youth department. And I was able to attend, and you co-led with one of our other reverends, Reverend Dr. Robert Ford. You co-led the men's group. And I was so tremendously blessed by sitting and listening and receiving what you had to say. So we say welcome back. Thank you for being with us again offering your time. I will just quickly introduce you. We are grateful to have Mr. Timothy Hughes, and he is joining us tonight. He hails from Chester, South Carolina, and is the son of Terry and Anitra Hughes. He is the middle child of 7 and prides himself as a man of good faith. Mr. Hughes holds degrees in counseling and education and currently works for the Charleston County School District as an exceptional child therapist. So Mr. Hughes, Timothy, we welcome you once again. And one of the things that I received when I sat in on the session that you co-led in the men's session in a grief workshop, you talked about ways, you were speaking to men at that point, but I think anyone can glean from this. You talked about particular ways we can respond to grief, and you talked about we can either explode or we can implode. So that really obviously caught my attention. And I would just ask that you would speak on that and other ways, healthier ways perhaps, that we can respond to grief in your own way.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Reverend Harris, I appreciate this opportunity to speak to everyone, and I thoroughly, at this point, have enjoyed everyone thus far. I really appreciate this panel and your expertise and everything that you have shared thus far. Just to kind of give everyone a brief context of who I am, I live at the intersectionality of education, mental health, and faith. I'm a certified classroom teacher, so I taught middle school mathematics for many years, and then I know I look young, but then I transitioned into mental health, and then I became a therapist. So just to give you guys some context, and then I'm a Southern preacher's kid's son, so all that piece too. So I spoke in the men's group. I was talking to Reverend Harris and the rest of the group participants about how human beings, when we are exposed to distress, unrest, or any type of pain, we resort to different coping or safety measures or mechanisms to manage that in whatever way that we know how. And so oftentimes, the two most common unhealthy things that we do when we haven't been given the opportunity or haven't received the skill sets on how to manage our pain, I shared with the group that we do two things. Human beings either explode, is just when we released and we just, whether it's in anger outbursts or just however, whatever that looks like for that individual, or we implode, we just kind of collapse. And I like to think of it as a human being being like a container. All of us has a specific limit of what we can hold and what we can carry. And that involves like our thoughts, our emotions, and our body capacity. So all of us have our unique containers. And so with that, just like the air we breathe and we inhale and we exhale, there's only so much air that our bodies can contain. And that's like that with our emotions, thoughts, and our behaviors. There's only so much that we can manage within our frame, within our bodies. And so it's important to understand and to really learn how to be in relationship with pain. And oftentimes when I tell people that, they tell me, Tim, what you mean by relationship with pain? Humans, we haven't been, most of us haven't been trained or taught how to be in relationship with pain. And what I mean is how to manage pain, how to steward pain, how to organize it and rearrange it in such a way that is not debilitating. And it's we have the awareness and understanding that we're going to live this life with a series of pain. None of us are going to be without pain throughout this life journey. So it's all about reclaiming your power and understanding how can I relate to this pain in such a way that I acknowledge, embrace, and honor this pain, but it doesn't like enable me to fulfill the life that I want for myself. And so it's all about cultivating skills and getting information on how we can manage the difficulties and the stressors and the traumatic events that we go through. And I just feel that we don't really have these types of discussions a lot about how to manage pain. I know when people hear that in a phrase, relationship with pain, it sounds kind of strange. What do you mean, relationship with pain? But we have to do it. The reality is we have to, because it's inevitable, and we need information on how to manage it. And so I am a therapist embedded into Charleston County School District. And so I work with students K through 12 and as well as students at the alternative schools. And so it's all about learning coping strategies and really giving yourself permission to feel the things that you feel in your emotions. I think a lot of times culturally, historically, in our society, we haven't been really given the permission to really feel and to honor the pain and the emotions that comes up when we have these experiences. And a lot of times people in good measure, they do things that restrict our pain. Like I think about someone that's that has lost someone, and as you were so beautifully describing, Ms. President, like that loss of just losing your son. Oftentimes, family members or friends may come and just try to tell you, "Oh, it's gonna be all right." They might want to just hold you, and sometimes the clinical framework that I have, I think it's important to just be present and then allow people to be present in that emotion and not restrict it, just allow it to flow. Because the reality is emotions are transient, they're fleeting, they don't reside forever. So I think it's important to really allow that experience to really run its course fully. And when it does, then you allow room for other those most, I really don't like to say negative emotions. I like to negative or positive emotions. I like to frame it as more desirable and less desirable emotions, because me as a human, I feel like all of my emotions are valid. So we really don't have negative emotions. We have more desirable and less desirable emotions. That's how I like to frame it. And so once those less desirable emotions have ran their course, then we make way and give room for the more desirable and the more easier emotions to come and to take room in our space, in our hearts, and in our minds. And so, yeah, it's all about this. It's a continuum of learning skills and things that give us joy, that give us peace, that serves us, that allows room for a new wave of thinking. Because one thing about trauma changes how you see yourself, how you see others, and how you see the world. And I think in order to interrupt those negative patterns of thinking, we have to integrate and provide experiences to create a new wave of thinking that is inconsistent to whatever the trauma has dictated for a while. We have to provide an opportunity for some consistency, and hopefully it gets the person or individuals to a point where you say, hey, maybe there's a possibility or new narrative to my life, to my story, that will be more freeing and liberating and hopeful and helpful and fulfilling, and bring forth that joy, that peace, that love, and all of that good stuff that we humans so desperately need. So hopefully, Reverend Harris, that answer your question somewhere.
Absolutely. I think by the end of this evening, I will have the material to write about 7 books, and I will be able to join Sister Angela as a published author. But thank you, Timothy, for sharing. I would just also lean on your expertise and experience with the youth community as someone who works with the K through 12 age group. And I'm wondering about some of the experiences that the youth population might experience regarding traumatic events. So what would you say, and I will open this up in just a second to all of our panelists, but resources that are available for our youth population, our children, what would you say about that?
Yeah, so I've actually been in Charleston for 2 years, so I haven't been here so long, so I'm still, getting acclimated to the area. But my tenure here within Charleston County School District, well, first of all, trauma within itself, anytime an individual, and I guess specifically children and adolescents, well, really anyone, when they go through trauma, some of the indicators is any changes in behaviors. If it's anything that's outside of, like, for the people that loved ones and parents and people that know these individuals, anytime you observe things that are outside of their norm, if they're more reserved or more withdrawn than normal, if they're the opposite, they're more vocal, or like they're giving like all these outbursts all the time, and any changes in their patterns of behaviors and things like that, typically these are indicators that something is there. something has changed. A lot of times trauma changes how people relate to one another. So typically they may withdraw from their friends. They may not be as vocal with their parents or with their siblings. They may engage in certain behaviors to numb or to cope with pain, whether it's substance misuse or all types of extreme behaviors, whether it's driving recklessly or just engaging in all kind of like adventurous things that are deemed extreme outside of their parameters of their personality. So I think anytime a person that when you have a loved one, someone, and you notice things, some tendencies or behaviors that is not typical, I think after a traumatic extreme event that they've endured, I think those typically are signs that, hey, maybe I want to have a conversation or just want to see how can I show up and to be supportive. And I think beautiful, one of the panelists referenced this, particularly, I think it was a question. Someone was asking, like, when you have those reluctant family members or children that are reluctant about seeking out support. And that is a challenge. And even with the work that I do, I work for a school district, but I also work for an agency as well. And so sometimes the teenagers that I have been mandated by law and things like that. But I think specifically as a parent dynamic, I think one of the most beautiful things you can do to really encourage and to cultivate a willingness for your child to engage in support is to kind of strip off that parent-child dynamic just for a moment and really present, to look at your child as a human being and to really lead with empathy and to lead with grace and to really try to validate and just see and hear their experience. I know sometimes that could be a challenge as a parent because it's like, no, I'm the authority. You need to do what I say and, all the things, right? But I think it is so powerful and critical, like if you can just remove that construct or that frame for a second and really just hear the experiences and the things of what your children are saying and really just try to let them know, like, I hear you, without no criticism, no judgment, no advice, just there is a power and presence and being just there to listen. You don't have to be a therapist, you can be anybody, but there is a extraordinary power and just being prevalent and people really having that validation and being seen and heard. So that is a beautiful thing that can hopefully encourage children to seek out support when they really see, like, wow, my mom, my dad, they didn't fuss, they didn't get on me, they really listen. It tends to really they tend to be more open to the process of going to a support group or going to a counselor or getting the support or utilizing the resources. So I would love to encourage that. Someone was saying that, and I thought that was beautiful. And so, there are a lot of resources that the panelist has already listed. There is a power in community and connection. Human beings were neurobiologically designed for connection. So we need that in every way, especially after traumatic and distressful experiences. So support groups, we live in the age of information and internet. Like, take full advantage of the internet. There's so many resources and information out there, psychoeducation on signs and symptoms and prominent behaviors after experiencing things. So I would definitely encourage everyone to take advantage of the internet because Google almost have everything. But there is a website, it's called, and I can list it in the chat, it's called DougieCenter.org. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar, but it is a online web tool resource for just on grief. And it has so much information, worksheets, information about support groups. It's a national organization, so it has information about support groups in your area, and it breaks it down by age category for children, adolescents, young adults, those that's dealing with grief. And that is a great resource for anyone to use, and even a family member who knows someone that has been through, something devastating, so they can support their loved ones. So that's one resource. But again, there's power in, being connected with your local organizations, your local churches, all the things that a lot of the other panelists have said. So yeah, there are resources out there, and it doesn't have to be something that's for a fee. Like the online resource, DougieCenter.com, it is, there's no fee for the information on there. So yeah.
All right. Hey, thank you, Brother Timothy. If you would
Yes,
put
sir.
that in the chat, we'll make sure that folks can see it. So I just welcome and invite any of our panelists to respond either to that last question or any other comment that's maybe been stirred within you as we've had this discussion. Anything anyone would like to add from our panelists. We do have a couple more questions that I have seen in the chat, and we'll make sure we express those as well. But I just wanted to give this opportunity for any of our panelists to share additional thoughts. And feel free
if
to
I
jump in.
may,
Yes.
Reverend Harris, I just thank you so much, Mr. Hughes. I really appreciate the idea of, oftentimes I get a lot of the same questions from parents of not knowing how to support our kids when these things happen, and helping families to remind that one of the best predictors of kids when they've experienced trauma or these things of them being resilient is having that social connectedness to people that are important in their life, and having someone say, I'm here to listen. I believe you. I know this is tough. And it's so important. And then I think it's also important for caregivers to remember that when your kids are distressed, that can be really hard for you too. And it's okay for you to reach out for support. And there's groups for parents who have experienced stuff. Again, NAMI is a great resource. We offer in some of our services for parent supports. There's community centers, because even when you're doing the best thing for your kids, it can also still be really tough to just be a parent, and recognizing that you can lean on each other, and that you also deserve to have a space to feel those feelings and to sit with that and let yourself process the emotions of seeing your kid in pain, and that's okay too.
I'll just jump on your last question too, Reverend, is something that some of our patients, again, we deal with and work with young folks. So we're often also working with their parents and caregivers, right? And something that I think has come up a few times, and Keith, I'm sure, can attest to this, is them saying like, oh, I didn't even know that resource existed, right? Like, so yes, Google is powerful, but sometimes we don't even know the question to ask Google, right? We don't even know that there's something out there, because I think, I think I'm kind of speaking really vaguely right now, but, folks that have like lived in their community their whole life, if they've never heard of something, then it doesn't exist, right? Like, forget Google. Oh, I've never heard of that. Like, when did that get here, right? Like, you almost don't believe that something exists, because we just kind of work in our own world. And so one of the things that our patients sometimes say is like, oh, I had no idea this was a resource. I had no idea that this service was available in my community. Not talking about turning the tide, but talking about resources and services and agencies that exist that Keith, Donnie, or Kat have said, hey, have you thought about trying this? Hey, have you called these people? Let's call them. Let's set up an appointment. Let's ask some questions, right? So, I'll give an example about like rental assistance, right? So perhaps there's a family struggling to pay their rent, and they think that, well, if the housing authority doesn't have a solution for me, like, that's it, I'm at the end of my road here. But what they might not know is that there's other organizations in the community that also provide rental assistance, right? And so having folks in the communities, at least like a North Star, right? Like, oftentimes our client advocates and folks like Meg and Mr. Hughes, like, they're a contact, and that contact is the connection to all of these resources and services. So I think uplifting the folks that have those connections, and giving them the resources and the support to continue to do that, and to empower other folks to be able to do that, so we can create this really complex web of resources that are available, that are also easily accessible, right? Removing the barriers. Meg was talking about, folks that don't have insurance or money or transportation. Those will not be the reasons they do not receive that service. And so I think that can lead to a larger soapbox about, social inequities and all that fun stuff. But I think too, leaning on, your elders in the community, leaning on the folks in the community that have connections, and not being afraid to ask for help, right? Is also really powerful too. So I just want to kind of put that there too.
So I want to quickly, I know there are so many responses to the questions that we've just heard, but I want to make sure that we get to a couple of the questions that have been submitted in our chat function, because I think these are really important and we want to take advantage of all these literal resources that we have. So I want to get to a couple of these questions, and maybe these two questions can be combined in some way. But one of the first questions talks about, it goes back to what you were sharing, Timothy. I invite you or anyone to talk about this, but you mentioned, Timothy, about being in relationship with pain. So the writer just wants you to elaborate, or anyone to elaborate on what does it mean to be in relationship with pain.
Yeah, of course. So this human experience, we all gonna go through distressful situations, and oftentimes it's gonna manifest in that emotion of pain, if it's something that is less desirable. And so because pain, no matter how the measure of it is inevitable for this experience, I think it's important, when I say relationship with pain, it's important to understand how we manage it. That's essentially what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so basically it's understanding that this moment or this situation, this experience that's causing me pain, this is not my identity. This is not the summation of my whole life. And so I have to be empowered enough, equipped enough, educated enough to understand, okay, I acknowledge this experience. It caused me this pain, this distress, but I have some information, some tools where I can manage it. I can organize and rearrange, redirect and direct pain. Really, it's about putting pain in its proper place, and I think it's important to do that because, again, it's going to happen. We're going to have these experiences, a lot of things unexpected, and we have to be empowered enough, equipped enough to know how to just get through these moments. So that's what I mean by relationship with pain. It's all about stewarding the pain in a way that is healthy and that is manageable for you.
Yeah.
And just to piggyback off of what Timothy just said, we also need to know that the pain doesn't last forever. And I guess that's where the hope comes in. It doesn't last forever. When we're in the pain, we're like, oh my gosh, this is just, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. But if we think about some of the other things that we've been through that were painful, and we made it through that, know that this pain, this relationship with this pain is not going to last forever either. But be prepared, because like you said, it's going to come. We're human. It's going to come. Just be prepared and make sure you have the proper resources like we stated. I just wanted to add that to you, Timothy.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. We do have another question. We'll get to that one, but I just want to make sure that anything that we've already covered that any of our panelists would like to add to or share their thoughts. I want to make sure we leave room for anyone who'd like to share anything from the standpoint of anything we've already covered.
Reverend Harris, I just wanted to add one thing. I just recall when my daughter was going through her issues and I was dealing with it as a parent. People will often say to me, just pray harder, or just, you're not praying hard enough. And that kind of puts the blame on the parent or whoever is dealing with that family member. But what I've come to realize is that you can have a therapist. So just because I'm seeking a therapist or I'm using a therapist does not mean I don't have a relationship with God and my pastor. And so people have to remember that and know that these resources are available. It doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God. They're available, and I believe that God gave me these resources to use to help me get through it and to be a better mom and to help my daughter. So I just wanted to say that, put that out there.
And I believe scripture confirms
Mhm.
that perspective, because I think of a passage, I believe it's in Proverbs, that talks about there being safety in a multitude of counselors. So in relationship with others, we find safety, especially those like this on this panel tonight. So much expertise and resources that are represented. And if we don't take anything away from this evening, I think we have certainly stressed the point that no one has to go through their journey by themselves. We were a little bit afraid, to be quite honest, because we had so many panelists. We usually have only 3 or so, but then we just started thinking as a committee, well, I know this person and I know this person. And our heart, our passion is to make sure that the larger community knows that there are these resources when, like so many have already said, you get to a place and folks say, I never knew that these resources were available. So again, with wisdom, with a multitude of counselors, there is safety. I want to just share, maybe that connects with the thought that you just offered us. There is a comment or a question that says, how do you help a middle schooler deal with death when they are also angry that they were not told that the relative was as sick as they were? So it sounds to me like that was a traumatic experience for that middle schooler because they were unaware of how urgent the situation was. And I'm going to read between the lines here. They didn't say this, but I will interject and let anyone offer their perspective as well. But I sensed that the child was not told because there was a desire to protect, which I have experienced in other settings, that same scenario. So I don't know, I don't want to speak for this person who offered the comment, but I will just offer this to our panelists. If there's a response to that question, how do you help a middle schooler with the death of a loved one and they're angry because they didn't know the situation was as it is?
I think we're all deferring to you, Timothy.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think one of the challenges parents can do is to decide how a child is going to respond. You know, I think in good spirit and in good thought, it's like, well, no, I don't want to share with my child what is happening, even though this is definitely happening. So we just gonna refrain from sharing the information with them, and we withhold the information. And ultimately, what happens is what is happening with the child. They're angry, they're upset, they have all these questions and unknowns because it wasn't communicated. So I think it is critical for parents in that particular context, when you have things like that, it's to have that difficult conversation, to let the child in, because the reality is, if it is something that is inevitable and that it is going to cause a major shift in the way of life and the way that he or she know life, you have to share with them and you have to allow them to have that experience. I think when parents, because your parents, you want to make decisions, you want to protect your child. I get that. But in situations like this, we can't decide or predict how he or she is going to respond. And we have to allow them to have their experience, have their journey of grief and loss, and to manage that. And I think at this point, what the parent can do is acknowledge the choice that they made wasn't the best choice. And I know that could be kind of hard, but the reality is, I think having a level of accountability and responsibility and how that was handled. And I think the parent can just be vulnerable and share their story. It's like, this was something new to me. I imagine this is the first time that parent has had the child to lose their parent. And I think the parent can just, express their heart. I didn't know. what I thought was my protection, but what I have come to understand is that hurt you, and now you're upset and angry, and so I'm sorry. Like I think it's just that recognition of that choice, not that that was the intention to hurt the child, but it did, and so I think it takes a level of humility and self-grace and compassion for that parent, and then allow that child to have that emotional experience from where they are right now. But you know, it's hard, and I want to definitely not dismiss or dishonor or deny the parent in that difficult state. I mean, I don't know what I would have done, even with my clinical expertise. I don't know, but I think it's an just acknowledging that wasn't the best decision, and I apologize that I hurt you, and then that you wasn't made aware. Hopefully, you can find it throughout some time to forgive me. But I want you to know that whatever you feel, no matter what you feel, is valid. And I'm here with you. I'm here to love you and to support you and hopefully provide the help for you or to seek out help for you. I think just acknowledge and allow. I tell my clients sometimes, don't forget to use your human. And what I mean by that, just show your heart, you know?
Yeah.
Oftentimes we do things and it's misinterpreted. It's not delivered in the most effective way, but it's like, just show people your heart. Like, this is where I was with it, within my heart. You know, and hopefully you can see it. If not, I understand. But I'm just here to be with you throughout the long haul of this journey of grief and managing this pain, being in a relationship, because this pain is fleeting. It will. But I think at this critical age, it is important to just really embrace that child right now, because this is where the impressions, the science says that the trauma that permeates from our upbringing from the ages of 13 to 25, it really frames how we do life.
Yep.
So I think it's critical in this age group. But anyway, I thank you for the question.
And gain the trust back from the child. Being accountable and apologizing is gaining your trust back, because they lose trust. When you leave them out of things, or you try to, as a parent, try to protect them from things, they lose trust.
Right.
So just being accountable and apologizing and saying that, hey, mama, daddy, we're not perfect.
Yeah.
But I really was trying to protect you. So I did it from a place of love. But I wasn't right. And I see how it makes you feel. And move further. But gain that child's trust back, definitely. By being accountable.
Yeah.
Angela, I think it's appropriate that you were speaking at this point, because there was a question that was directed for you. And I invite any of our panelists also, again, to share from their perspective. And this might be our final concluding question for this evening. But it talks about how you helped, and maybe our panelists can talk about how the other children, when you lost Amari, how you helped your other children deal with his death and the pain of losing their brother. So we throw that question to you, but we invite anyone to share when this might be part 2 of our discussion. We are thinking about, and we've touched on it, we grieve individually, we face our traumatic experiences individually, but then especially those who are responsibility as parents or others to care for others in the family or in that community. We deal with our own grief, and then we're caring for others and trying to shepherd them through their grief. So I take that question and frame it that way. How do we care for self? How do we care for others at the same time? And I will share this from my perspective. Sometimes we neglect our own need to grieve because we're so focused on caring for others. But that's my 2 cents I'm throwing in. So I invite anyone, Angela, that was offered to you, but I invite anyone to share from that perspective as well. Grieving for self, caring for others within our sphere of influence as they grieve.
To answer that question, I think I'm still looking for the answer, because I would say in the beginning, I was focused. I have 2 other daughters, a 26-year-old daughter and a 21-year-old daughter. I was focused on their mental and their grief. And I put mine to the side But by me putting mine to the side and burying mine, in the end, I ended up actually hurting them because when it came out, it came out. When I exploded, like you said, Timothy, it was later, it explode, whatever you said. When it came out, and it came out directed to my kids. So honestly, I'm still searching for the answer to that. How do I grieve how do I grieve and deal with my pain and the anger that I had and still try to be there for her sisters? Because yeah, mama lost her son, but they also lost their brother. So I'm still struggling with that. Honestly, in our family, I'm still struggling with that, making sure I'm trying to be there for them as well as myself. And then this new group of parents that are my new family now, these grieving parents. So it's like, I don't even know. I don't even know how to answer that. I don't know the answer.
Well, Angela, I will just chime in. I think you've answered that question in this whole setting in the most appropriate way, just by saying, when we're searching for closure, sometimes with these experiences, that search continues. But what you have just shared is that you have found community. And as we search, as we continue the journey, as we continue to have our stories written, that there are collaborators in the story around us. And as we search, we do not search by, or we don't have to search by ourselves. So that's my takeaway. And I think that's the most appropriate way, perhaps, to, I won't say end this discussion, but put a little comma in our time to semicolon in our time for tonight, because I was reminded by one of our panelists that as much as my heart is to be a fixer, there are some things on our journey that won't be fixed in the moment. And that's, for me, a part of honoring that pain, experiencing that pain, living with that pain, understanding that that pain might not be as painful as it was, but there's some reminders that it's still there. But that's okay in the sense that I'm still living and my story is still being told and written. I don't know if there's a perfect way to end this conversation for tonight, other than to say thank you once again for this wonderful panel, certainly for the attendees. I will just say that I know for some, you were not able to get a hold to the information that was included in the chat. I've saved those documents and I've saved the resources and the emails, everything that was included in our participant chat, we have saved, and I believe we will have those available on our Royal Foundation website. So everything that our panelists spoke about, we'll be able to include on our Royal Foundation website and be able to reference those materials. And again, Meg, I'll look forward to getting those tangible resources in my hand to share with our community. But to each of you, each of our panelists, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. I've earned a reputation for not being the most vocal preacher around, kind of quiet and reserved. But I can be long-winded too. There's a flip side of that. And I'm being long-winded in terms of my gratitude because I just can't say enough. And I believe I speak for many who participated in this chat tonight. So as I thank you, again, we thank our pastor for the Royal Missionary Baptist Church, Pastor Holt, for spearheading this vision to even think about the fact that this is a needed platform to partner resources in the community with the faith community. We thank our leader in the Wellness on Wednesday, who is behind the scenes right now, but certainly present, Sister Cleo Brown, other members of the Wellness on Wednesday community, including Suzanne, who's our first time technical guru, making sure everything went as planned as far as the technical capability. So many to thank, and we thank you all again. With that thought in mind, we'll just close our time in a moment of reflection, and I'll offer a word of prayer for those who would like to share in this time. Eternal God, again, we thank you for each participant, each panelist, each attendee. Lord, it can be overwhelming personally and as a community when we see so much going on. But we thank you that as the fields are ripe for harvest, you're sending laborers, you're sending people who care and people who are skilled and prepared and who have expertise and training to meet needs. I pray for each of them as there's so much work to be done. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. So I ask that you would give them the needed strength and energy to continue the work, the wonderful work that they're doing. I pray for each attendee and each listener, those who are present tonight, those who will see this recording in some other venue later on, that they would understand that there are people who care, and that there's a God who cares and who loves them. Thank you that our journey continues. Our story is yet to be told. And you are our co-writer, and you are our partner on this journey, that we can say you will never leave us and neither will you forsake us. So thank you, Lord, for helping us fill in the gaps to our story and share with others who need to hear. Thank you for this day and days to come. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
All right, safe travels.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you, Reverend Harris.
Absolutely. Thank you.